When I married again, I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was just trying to survive, and keeping that one secret felt safer than explaining years of loss and rebuilding. I let my husband and his children believe I was starting over with nothing, never mentioning the winery that quietly kept my life together. What I didn't know then was that this silence would protect me in ways I couldn't imagine. If this story speaks to something you've lived through, you're welcome to support the channel by liking and subscribing for more real-life stories. When I remarried, I told myself this time would be simpler, quieter, built on honesty and mutual respect. Yet the truth that I carried into this marriage was something I kept carefully folded away, not out of greed or deception, but out of fear of losing the fragile piece I had finally found. After my first husband died, my life narrowed to survival, raising my children alone, keeping the winery afloat through long winters and unpredictable markets, and learning how to sit with loneliness without letting it harden me. The winery had been my parents' legacy, passed down with stories of sacrifice and resilience, and for years I treated it less like an asset and more like a responsibility that anchored me when everything else felt uncertain. When I met my second husband, he was kind in a quiet, steady way, a widower himself, with grown children who were polite but guarded, clearly protective of the world they had built after losing their mother. I didn't introduce myself as a business owner or landholder, only as a woman who loved early mornings, honest work, and the comfort of routine, because after so much loss, I wanted to be seen for who I was, not what I owned. As our relationship deepened, I sensed an unspoken assumption forming, that I was financially modest, dependent even, and I didn't correct it, telling myself that money complicates things and love should come first. Still, small moments began to unsettle me, casual remarks about inheritance, jokes from his children about starting over from scratch, questions framed lightly but carrying weight beneath them. I brushed these off, reminding myself that blended families are always delicate, and that trust takes time, especially when grief is involved. The day we married was simple and heartfelt, surrounded by a small circle of friends, and as I stood there, I felt both grateful and strangely alone, aware that a significant part of my life remained invisible to the people now closest to me. Managing the winery became something I spoke about vaguely, careful with details, while internally I wrestled with the fear that revealing the truth would shift the balance of our relationship, turning affection into expectation. One evening, overhearing a conversation between my husband and his children about finances and future security, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the same feeling I had known during my first marriage when silence seemed easier than honesty. I realized then that my secret was no longer just about privacy, but about boundaries, and whether I was protecting myself or unintentionally building a wall between us. The tension grew quietly, like a crack spreading beneath a calm surface, and I knew that sooner or later, the truth about the winery would surface, not as a proud revelation, but as a test of the relationships I had worked so hard to rebuild. As I lay awake that night, listening to my husband's steady breathing, I understood that love alone wouldn't decide what came next, and that the choice I was avoiding would soon ask to be made. The weeks after I realized my secret could no longer stay buried were filled with a quiet tension that never fully left the room, even during the simplest moments. I watched my husband move through our shared space with ease, making plans for the future, talking about retirement, about stability, never suspecting that the foundation of our life together was not quite what he believed it to be. I told myself I had hidden the truth to protect everyone, that my past losses had taught me the danger of mixing love and money, but the longer I stayed silent, the heavier that justification felt. The winery had saved me once, giving me purpose when grief had nearly hollowed me out, yet now it stood between me and the honesty I owed the man who had offered me a second chance at family. The turning point came during a quiet evening when his children visited, sitting around the table talking about inheritance in abstract terms, joking about what they would leave behind someday. Their laughter was gentle, but it unsettled me, because I could hear the unspoken assumptions beneath it. In that moment, I realized my silence wasn't neutral, It was shaping expectations that would eventually hurt everyone involved. Later that night, when the house finally went still, I told my husband I needed to talk, and for the first time since my first marriage ended, my voice trembled with fear of being truly seen. I didn't reveal everything at once, but I told him enough about the land, the business, the life I had built before we met, and how deeply afraid I was of being loved for what I owned rather than who I was. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the silence that followed felt different from the one I had been carrying alone. He admitted that part of him felt hurt, not by the winery itself, but by the distance my secrecy had created. He reminded me that trust wasn't about entitlement, it was about choosing openness even when it felt risky. In the days that followed, we spoke more honestly than we ever had, about boundaries, about finances, about how to protect our relationship from misunderstandings before they could harden into resentment. I eventually told his children as well, not to impress them, but to clear the air, and while their reactions were mixed, the honesty gave us room to reset expectations rather than quietly accumulate them. What surprised me most was the sense of relief that came after the truth was fully spoken. The winery didn't lose its meaning or its place in my life, but it stopped being a wall I hid behind. I learned that independence doesn't have to mean isolation, and that love in later life asks for a different kind of courage, the courage to trust that honesty won't erase you. We moved forward more carefully, with clearer lines and softer assumptions, and while nothing was perfect, it felt real in a way it hadn't before. Looking back, I understand now that the secret wasn't what saved me, honesty did, and choosing it allowed me to step into a future that felt lighter, not because it was easier, but because it was finally shared.